Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always and everywhere acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I want to be a little closer to you. That's okay. When I retired from full-time parish ministry in 2019, I had to do a job that I absolutely hate doing, downsizing. I lived in a rectory with 2 bedrooms, a full dining room, a living room, a study that was a converted garage, and I had an office where I had collected books and other items for 15 years. Those items were moved into the rectory, and when I retired, I had given myself about 3 weeks to prepare for the move. And I worked like a stevedore for every single minute of those 3 weeks. And I remember just how horrible it is to move. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about, downsizing, either for yourself or someone else. So I moved to Camarillo, finally got everything in, and then my mother, who lived in St. Louis, had a series of health crises, and my brother, who lives in New York, and I decided that we had to move her close to me because I was retired and he wasn't, so I could take care of her. So just after I finished getting settled here, I went to St. Louis to help my mother downsize and move. We'd done that twice before, but still, it was just a really hard job. And when you're making, when you're doing those kinds of moves, there are just so many hundreds of decisions you have to make, right? What do I keep? What do I have room for? What do I have to give away? Where can it go? Where it can be useful? And both of those experiences, we got my mother moved out here successfully, by the way. Both of those experiences reinforced how attached I am to my possessions. I mean, it is just a wrenching thing when you have to decide what books, you love all of them, to go to the library, which ones to keep. What do you do with old papers and photographs? A lot of them I just moved right in with me in a box, and my daughter someday will have to decide what to do with them. So you sort of push it down the field a little bit. But I am attached. I think we all are attached to what we own. Someone once said that everything I've given away has the marks of my fingernails on it. Cling to it, right? And this is why the gospel for today is challenging for us, right? Jesus knows how attached people are to what they own. And in his day in Palestine, he lived in a subsistence agrarian society where one dry winter didn't mean you couldn't water your lawns anymore. We complain about that, right? We've had more than one. It meant the difference between life and death for that population. Or the death of a primary breadwinner in that society meant sometimes the difference between living in your own home and moving in with your extended family. So, more than attachment, the people in Jesus' time and day were living in fear, in great anxiety that something would happen to what they own. And I just have to make a contrast between that culture, which is the culture shared in fact, by billions of people in the globe today, particularly in areas sub-Saharan Africa, and our experience today in the United States and the Western states, we are worried and anxious about so many things. You can't turn on the news without hearing about inflation or recession. And, we experience the marks of that every day in our lives. But that's not the same thing as being terrified that the little bit you have is going to be taken away. Still, worries about the economy are a full-time job for many of us in our culture. And so, how do we hear these words of Jesus? Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not give out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. In many ways, I think the most important sentence in that passage is the first one. Do not be afraid, little flock. Jesus never uses that phrase, little flock, anywhere else in the Gospels. But he uses it with his disciples because he is affectionate with them. He's tender with them. He knows their fears and their anxieties. And he knows how desperate their poverty might be to them. Do not be afraid. But what helps us deal with our fears? What helps us deal with our anxieties? The clue is in the next sentence. When Jesus says, it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. In other words, Jesus is saying that we are held through faith in God's loving providence. There is something that will lift us up, that will raise us up when we're cast down. And if we spend the bulk of our mental and emotional energy worrying all the time, we won't see the signs of grace and the signs of God's love and mercy that are all around us every day. And so we have to learn over time to trust that which we cannot see. We have to learn to trust that our prayers are being answered even though no voice comes back to tell us so directly that they are. We have to develop the resources of faith in community by ourselves so that, in the words of Hebrews, we know what faith is. The assurance, the conviction of things unseen, the assurance of things unseen, the conviction of things not given. I just blew that. What is it? You've got your bulletins. Read that first sentence from Hebrews out loud. Say it again.
Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen.
When I count to 3, would all of you say that together? 1, 2, 3.
Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen.
That's what Jesus is trying to tell his disciples. And it's good news for all of us. If we don't understand that, we have to try and understand it, because it is gospel medicine for our fears and anxieties. And what's the alternative? I mean, if we don't live in that kind of faith, do we really want to spend our days and nights worried and anxious that what we have will be taken away? There's a wonderful hymn in the hymnal, God of Grace and God of Glory. And this one stanza, to me, is a pretty good diagnosis of what is wrong with all of us. Cure thy children's warring madness, bend our pride to thy control, shame our wanton selfish gladness, rich in things and poor in soul. To be rich in things and poor in soul might just be the best diagnosis for what is wrong with us. Because until we develop the confidence, the trust, the faith, the conviction that the author of Hebrews talks about, we don't own our possessions, they own us. We don't possess whatever money gives us security, it possesses us. And somehow in this crazy culture which ramps itself up day after day after day by advertising, telling us what we need to buy and who we need to be in order to be happy and successful and loved even, until we develop the depth of faith that knows Jesus is right, we're going to be whipped around like a flag in the wind, uncentered, unable to find our true happiness. And the thing about what Jesus is saying is that, and by the way, it doesn't say give everything you have away. Just want to note that. Sell your possessions, okay. Go on eBay and sell the stuff you don't want and give it away. The thing that Jesus wants everyone to know is that there really, truly is more joy in giving than in receiving. You know that, don't you? I mean, absolutely, it is true. We get much more joy when we give what we have away or give money to a cause we believe in than we do when it comes our way. If we can get over our fear of losing. So what Jesus is inviting his disciples into is a project that has already started. A project to transform and redeem the world through the Spirit of God. To cast out fear and let love inside. To try and be free of what we own so it doesn't own us. And to be people in the world with an inner freedom to go wherever we go and be signs of the kingdom. Now, to me, someone who did that beautifully was the person that all of Los Angeles mourned this last week. You know who I'm talking about? Vin Scully, right? Anybody baseball fans here? Have you signed up with Paul to go to the Dodger Stadium in September? Vin Scully, and I love baseball, was a master storyteller, right? He made each game interesting and delightful and fun, sharing facts, telling stories in that beautiful voice of his, a totally unique voice. But But to me, it was more than his ability as a sports writer, even as a storyteller, that we mourn in Los Angeles at his death. It was how he treated everyone. In the LA Times yesterday, there was an article written by Bill Plaschke, great sports writer. And I just want to read you what Bill Plaschke said about Vin Scully. And this is a story from Vin Scully's last broadcast. Anyone hear that? I remember this story, and when Bill Plaschke wrote about it, the light went off. I remembered so much. Light went on. So this is what Plaschke is recalling about Vin Scully. In this last broadcast, Scully focused on the Dodgers bat boy, Champ Peterson, who was celebrating his 29th birthday. And then Vin Scully said this: the thing about Champ, and he says it, he's outspoken about it, he says, yes, I have Down syndrome, but I'm okay. He's a terrific young man. He's just a marvelous, marvelous, wonderful man. Champ Peterson, and he's a champ. Bill Plaschke wrote, has any play-by-play announcer ever consistently relayed so many life stories with such dignity? That's what we'll miss the most, right? I see him as walking in the world as a beacon of how to treat others, a beacon of that freedom to give what we have away. Probably the truest thing in the passage from Luke today is that simple sentence: where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. It actually describes what life is all about. What we put our emotional, spiritual energy into becomes our treasure, and our hearts always follow. So when our treasure lies in what is given to us by God and not by the world, we learn to be as generous in our own hearts as God is. Or we are on the journey of becoming as generous as God is. Or at least, maybe today, a little bit more generous than we were yesterday. And that is freedom. That's what Jesus wants his disciples to know. True freedom isn't in taking in, it is giving away. It's not upward mobility, it's downward mobility. And Jesus gives his disciples this important lesson because he loves them and he wants them to be free. In the name of God, our Creator and Redeemer and Sustainer, Amen.